So in lesson 2, we're going to learn about networked computers, servers, and HTML. And there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm going to scroll way past it for a little bit because I want to motivate this in terms of where do we want to end up at the end of this session. So at the end, we see that there are some practice problems down here where we're going to build a, well, I skipped the vocab, so I'm not quite sure what a page is. I'm not quite sure what a site is. I'm not quite sure what CSS is, and I'm not quite sure what content is. How do you know what these things are? Well, all the vocab is up there, and I'll kind of give you some spark notes along the way while I tell you how I break down some of these things in my mind. So step 1, what is a page? Well, each of these individual things is a page. This thing on the left is going to be called index.html. This thing on the right is going to be called something called unix.html. And we're going to put some content inside of them. So that covers two things. A page is going to be something like an HTML file, which contains some information inside of it. The two things in cohort collectively form a site. So maybe you can notice there's a purple link on this side, a purple link on this side. And, well, maybe you can kind of guess that home is probably pointing in one direction, and Unix notes is probably pointing to the page called Unix. So each of these two things is a page, or individual pages, but in cohort they form a website. Now, the content finally is this actual stuff that says what do these two things contain. So let's kind of just draw some boxes around some stuff for a moment. So let's call this a thing. We'll say this is a thing, this is a thing, this is a thing, this is a thing, thing. If only there was some better vocab that we could use to describe these things. Again, probably want you to read about for that kind of stuff. I'm going to drop all these boxes, and I'm going to say that HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is something that goes from the top of the page down to the bottom. And I'm going to ascribe some words to each of these pieces. So the first thing up here, this Alexander L. Hayes, is called a heading, or a header. A heading or header is usually going to be initially inside of an H1, or the top level heading of the page. So next up is this piece called a paragraph. So the paragraph contains some text, and that's followed by another paragraph. But this second one is a little bit special because we already said that there's this hyperlink inside of it. And a hyperlink is done with something called an A tag, or an anchor tag, if you want the technical phrase for it. Following that, we have something else, but notice that this looks kind of like a header up here, but the text is a little bit smaller. So that's because this is actually a level 2 header object. Then following that, we have a list, which we'll need to know about the li, or the ul, and the li tags. On the right of the page, we have another h1, we have another anchor tag right here, but then we have this table right here. So tables are a little bit weird. Honestly, I have to look them up every time. But as long as you know that there's something called a table, inside of a table, there are individual rows, or table rows. And inside of each of those rows, there's individual pieces of data called table data. You can probably kind of ascribe all of these pieces to individual parts. So in total, we have this whole thing, which is the table. Inside of the table, we said there's an individual row, such as this row right here. Inside of this row, there are individual pieces of data, so 1 and 2. So great, you may say. We have a goal in mind where we're eventually going to build a website, but wait a minute, how do I build websites? So the good news is that it really does start from the foundations that we talked about last time. We talked about file system hierarchy. We even hinted that websites do also follow this hierarchy, where there's maybe a folder with a series of files inside of it, which may contain other folders and other files inside of them. And we also said that there's probably some kind of set of Linux commands that we're going to need to know, both to set up the structure and to eventually get it onto a server which users can interact with. So maybe if we zoom in onto this website itself, you'll see that it's actually a lot of different pieces. So there's cgi.luddy.indiana.edu, there's username Hayesall, and there's individual pieces like, info, infrabook, latest, i211, networks and servers.html. The reason that you're able to visit this website is because there is some server somewhere out there in the world which is storing these files, and when you go to a web address, that server is able to give those files to your web browser. So how do we actually get there? Well, we need to know about secure shell, we need to know about eventually hypertext markup language, and we need to know a tiny bit about web browsers themselves. So starting from here, we see some terminal commands. So this is probably going to be a good time to open up my terminal. So Windows key, type in the word TER, click terminal, open that up. I'm on Windows. Your mileage may vary very slightly if you're on Mac OS, but it should look pretty similar to this. Notice mine is opened into Ubuntu by default, but if yours doesn't, that's okay. You can do the drop-down menu right here, open up Ubuntu. I can drop out of that tab because I probably don't need it. I'll rearrange my windows just to give ourselves a little bit more space. Now the first thing inside of here is that it says we need to know about something called SSH, which is a way to log into other servers. So there's a server called silo.luddyindiana.edu, and using this SSH program, I'm able to log into the server. So let's kind of demonstrate that right now. So something kind of magical actually just happened, which is that it may objectively look in front of you like I'm still on my computer. Like, I've still got all these windows right here. You can still see that I have a web browser right here. But I'm kind of in a different computer now. So Hazel at Silo means that I'm actually logged into a different machine right now. If I open up a new Ubuntu tab, you may say that I can do ls, maybe I can touch notes.txt, and now there's a notes directory, now there's a notes file in my home directory. But back over on Silo, this is a different computer. Notes.txt does not exist over on Silo because Silo and my home directory on my personal machine are two different locations. So here's what happens. We now have two different locations. We have our personal machine and we have a server. On our personal machine, we pretty much have universal control over it. On the server, well, we may not have the ability to install different pieces of software. We may not be able to do absolutely anything that we want the same way we would be able to do on our personal machine. But the cool thing about the server is that it's big, it's powerful. Notice that I can make it, if I zoom out quite a bit, you'll see if I kind of zoom in and make this a little bit easier to see, this is a 48 core machine and it has a little bit over, let's zoom in again. It has about 503 gigabytes of memory. Okay, so great. We have a server and we have a way that we can log into it. How does that actually help us build websites? Okay, so let's go to step 2 of this. Kind of investigate the fact that we now have the Linux server. Maybe we can, inspect the fact that there's a lot of different people that are all kind of sharing this thing. Maybe we have the same kind of common utilities available to us, so we no longer have to worry about a bunch of different version parity problems. Okay, so websites and web server foundations. So in order to set things up, we want to get something called a CGI pub directory. Now, I already have one, so I'm going to kind of imagine that we've already done this make CGI-Y. So I could select this, do Control-C to copy, go back over here, right-click in the terminal and paste. Now, you will run this. I am not going to run this, so I'm just going to do backspace until it's gone. So pretend that you ran that. You probably may see a bunch of things where it says oh, you need to confirm, maybe do yes a couple times, maybe it'll take a few seconds to set everything up. But once that's done, you should have this actual CGI pub directory inside of it. So I'm going to change into that. Now I've got a lot of stuff in here, so it's going to look a little bit different. I'm just going to touch some file.html. So what did that do? Well, now there's some file.html inside of here, inside of my CGI pub directory. So I'm actually going to modify this address up here, open a new tab, repaste that inside of it, and I'm going to go to, actually, let me make this a little bit better. So https cgi luddyindiana.edu / your username. I'm going to copy that, drop that into the address bar, change username to my username. And I said that I just created some file.html, so let's add some-file.html there. And ooh, I have a page. there's nothing on this page, so let's kind of fix that. What happens if I start editing some file.txt, maybe smash the keyboard for a little bit, do Control X, Y, Enter, refresh the page over here? It looks like all of that stuff, which is on some file.txt on the server, is immediately available to me over on a web browser. So great. We now have we just accomplished a ton of work all in just a few lines of code. So I'd actually encourage you to do something kind of like I'm doing here. So I just created some random file. I opened that up in the web browser. I put some text inside of it, and I just kind of saw what happens. Honestly, this is kind of how I approach learning a lot of things, including HTML. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit further, kind of see some of the pieces that we want to put together. Maybe notice that we're eventually going to talk about some things in addition to HTML called CSS and JavaScript, but hint, hint, we're not going to really do that until Unit 2, and for now we're just going to focus on HTML. So HTML is a markup language which is composed of HTML tags, where an HTML tag represents the type of the content, such as a level 1 heading, and the content itself. So let's kind of imagine if we have this text right here, maybe we could style it with something like here, like this stuff down here. Well, what's that look like? I'll just copy that. I will open up nano, sumefile.html. I will drop out all that stuff by just holding the backspace key. I will do Control-Shift-V. Control-Shift-V on Windows or Linux systems. I think this is going to be Command-V on Mac OS. I'm going to do Control-O to write that out, give it an enter to save that up, go back to this tab, refresh the page, and notice we have a one-to-one mapping between an H1 block up here with the word HTML, and we have a paragraph inside of it, some strong text that says Hypertext Markup Language. Sure enough, it says Hypertext Markup Language right there, and some additional information before eventually culminating with a link here at the bottom of the page that is a link to the Wikipedia page for HTML itself. So what do we do next? Well, we can kind of see like what some of this other stuff looks like. Well, what does it look like when we drop in a paragraph right here? Okay, well, I'll do Control-O to write out, enter to save, refresh the page over here, and now we have some text. What does it look like if we see what some of these titles, chapters, and subheads look like? Well, we can find out. Control-Shift-V, paste it in there, Control-O to write it out, enter to save, refresh the page back over here. I'm doing that with Control-R, by the way. If you also want to click a button kind of like this, reload current page is the other way to approach that. So I don't have any images to demonstrate with, so I'm going to kind of skip images for now. We saw an example of a link, but maybe we could imagine that we have like some additional ones inside of here. Ooh, what did that do? Oh, and actually, this is kind of a good example to talk about Nano. So what happened to all the stuff? And oh, wait a minute, hold on. Okay, so look, I'm going to the left arrow, right arrow, left arrow, right arrow. Nano's actually changing a little bit, and this is because Nano does not do something called word wrap by default. So what happens is that if it runs out of space on the page, it's just going to drop this little caret right here, or this little greater than sign, indicating that I can keep going in this direction, and then when I go in one direction too far or the other, it is going to locally scroll that information so I can look around. Okay, kind of just interesting things to note for now. Lists are going to be useful because we know from earlier that lists are going to be part of our project. So what does it look like if we put a list inside of here? Control-Shift-V, give it a Control-O to save, enter to write that, refresh the page over here. Eggs, milk, awesome. What if we do an unordered list? Oh, actually, typo. I'm going to fix this in a bit. So what if we put a OL inside of here, an OL right here, do a quick Control-O to write, enter to save, refresh the page over in the web browser. Well, now we have an unordered list and we have an ordered list. What about tables? Ooh, okay, well, we have a table with a row inside of it, another row after that, and each of those has 2 columns. So I bet if we copy this whole thing, do Control-Shift-V to paste, enter, Control-O to write out, enter to save, refresh the web browser. It's a little hard to see, but I promise there is a table right here, which maybe we can see if we kind of zoom in and highlight it. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we basically have everything that we need in order to start the practice set. So we've already done steps 1. We connected to a remote server and we did set up the CGI stuff with these first 2 steps. So now we need to set up the structure of a basic website, which navigating to CGI pub, using the command line, setting up the basic structure for a website. I will do write out, save, enter, Control X to exit. I'm still in my CGI pub directory. I'm actually not going to use this sumfile.html anymore, so I'm just going to delete it now while I'm thinking of it. So first website with unix.html, CSS, and style.css, and index.html. I'll kind of scaffold that out with you real quick. So first website is a thing inside of that. Let's go ahead and create first website / index.html. Notice I was doing tab completion just to make that a little bit faster. I could do mkdir CSS. I could do touch CSS tab to autocomplete style.css. Then I can do touch another file called unix.html. That's going to be pretty much everything. For the next step, adding HTML content to the homepage, I think you probably basically have this one. You're going to modify the first website. Oh, actually, notice I made a mistake. I created all of these things outside of my first website directory. That's okay. We all make mistakes. It happens. We can just, in my case, I can just move CSS into my first website. I can do the exact same thing with unix.html back into that first website. And now if I do tree on first website, it looks like pretty much everything should be in its proper place. Now let me CD into that first website, tab to autocomplete, and now try for step 4. Nano index.html, copy all this text out, Control Shift V to paste it in there. Write out with Control O, enter to save. Now let's see whether or not something showed up in the web browser. So go back to that tab, try again, go back to that tab, paste it in here, change the all caps username to Hazel in my case for first website. And we didn't get an error. And if we look at the page source, which let me do that a little bit kind of in slow motion, right click, view page source. In a lot of web browsers, you can also do Control U to jump into that same thing. It's kind of just a quick shortcut. And sure enough, if I start typing some stuff inside of here, do write out, save, refresh the page, all of that information is now done. Okay, so I want you for the next few steps, work through these instructions. It's hopefully laid out pretty well and has some hints along the way in case you get stuck. What I want you to do is eventually be able to reproduce something very similar to this, after maybe switching out your my name to something like yours, probably switching my favorite HTML tags and my favorite Unix commands into your stuff.